will mention you one by one. Mrs. Anissa. Miss, okay, Igusti Ngura, presented by Miss Audrey, okay. Endrawati from Trisakti. Oh, online. Is there any presenter online? No, okay. And the last one, Mr. Muhammad Ikhlasul Amal. Okay. Maybe we can start from Miss Anissa Budiani Arafa. This is our first presenter from Institut Teknologi 10 November Surabaya. Used to be my hometown. She will be presenting her paper entitled Impact of Facade and Pavement Albedo on Outdoor Thermal Environment in the Heritage District of Jalan Tunjungan, Surabaya. Okay, Miss Anissa, the floor is yours. Oh, you may have blocks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anissa Budiani Arifa from Department Architecture Institute of Technology of 10 November Surabaya. Together with my supervisor, I will be presenting our research titled Impact of Facade and Pavement Albedo on Outdoor Thermal Environment in the Heritage District of Jalan Tunjungan, Surabaya. Before going further, I will explain about the terms of albedo, which is the focus on this research. Albedo refers to the ability of surface material to reflect solar radiation, and albedo measure from 0 to 1. It means the material that has albedo values closer to 1. It means the material can reflect more solar radiation. In contrast with material has albedo values closer to 0, it means that that material can absorb more heat. This research is motivated by the urban heat island phenomena. This issues is caused by three main factors, and the first one is high intensity human activities, and then dominance of heat absorbing surfaces and limited vegetation covers. And this phenomena effect on increasing air temperature and reduce outdoor thermal comfort. Based on the previous research about urban heat island in Indonesia, especially in Surabaya, the results show that the biggest phenomena of urban heat island in Surabaya happen in central Surabaya. And the object study of this research located in Jalan Tunjungan, a heritage district located in central Surabaya, which identified as a hotspot of urban heat island. And then based on the field measurement, daytime temperatures can reach approximately 43 degrees Celsius, and then 60 degrees Celsius for road surface temperature, and then 70 degrees Celsius for asphalt. And for the research gap, previous study about urban microclimate or urban heat island focus on the thermal effects on horizontal surface like roads and roofs. And studies on the influence of building facade albedo on outdoor thermal condition still limited. And existing research is mostly using simulation microclimate methodology and experimental in laboratory with limited field-based evidence. And then the research originality. This research investigates the combined influence of building facade albedo and pavement materials on the outdoor thermal environment. And the objective is to analyze the effects of facade albedo and pavement materials on outdoor thermal condition. And the second is to evaluate how existing material characteristic affect surface temperature and outdoor thermal condition. This is the methodology. So this research is using field observation or field measurement. This field measurement was conducted on October in 7 days periods, but the research focused on 3 clear sky days to minimize weather variability. And the location in Jalan Tunjungan heritage area. For the observation, we divide into 7 observation segments, and each segment has about 100 meters. And we put the measurement points in 2 sides of pedestrian sidewalks, in the north side and the southwest pedestrian sides. And microclimate parameters is air temperature, and then surface including facade and pavement temperature, and then relative humidity, wind speed, and solar radiation. And the protocol is we put all the measurement instrument mounted on a tripod at 1.5 meters above ground, and measurement duration 5 minutes per segment, and recording interval, because all the air temperature and relative humidity using data logger, and then recording interval is 10 seconds. And this is measurement times in period 8 a.m., 1 p.m., and 6 p.m. This is the result and discussion. This shows this picture shows the physical characteristic of across all the segments from segment 1 to segment 7. And the segment 1 is on the northeast side. The pavement combined with coral stone with 2 meter wide. And the southwest side, the pavement combined ceramic with 2 meter wide, and concrete with 2.5 meter wide, and then also with the building with height reaching up 10 meter. And the segment 2 on the northeast side, the pavement combine concrete with 4.5 meter wide, and then the building with 15 meters, and the condition is sparse vegetation. And in the southwest side, the pavement combined with ceramic 2 meters and concrete 2.5 meters wide, and 5 meter buildings with denser vegetation. And the segment 3, the northeast side combined with 2 meters coral stone, and then the southwest, the pavement combined with 2 meter ceramic and 2.5 meter concrete with building height 10 meters. And for segment 4, the northeast side, the pavement combined with ceramic 2.5 meter and 12 meter buildings with dense vegetation. And the southwest side, the pavement combined 2 meter and concrete 2.5 meter wide with no building and sparse vegetation. And then the segment 5, the northeast side, the pavement combined 2.5 meter and concrete 2 meter with 10 meter building. Langsung aja ya. Jadi so this is segment 6 and segment 6 have similar condition with segment 5 but with no vegetation, and segment 7 with have a condition different with segment 6. This is the optical and physical properties of surface materials. This is the optical and physical properties of surface materials in existing condition. This table shows that material that have brighter color like white color have the highest albedo values. Contrast with asphalt with the darkest color have the lowest albedo values. This is the result of air temperature. We try to correlate between air temperature and urban morphology. This result shows that between open area ratio and high albedo materials and height to width and vegetation covered, these four urban morphology have no correlation with air temperature, but the most significant correlation found in the relationship between height to width ratio. Segment with height to width ratio, the highest values has the highest air temperature. And then this is the surface temperature. Material with high albedo values tend to show the lowest surface temperature. This is the solar radiation. This shows the solar radiation really consistent from day 1 to day 3. This is one direction and relative humidity. The wind direction is mostly from the north, and speed range is 1.15 to 3.5. And fluctuation mostly driven by vehicular movement. And this is the conclusion. Albedo is strongly affects surface temperature, but only midly affects air temperature. And air temperature is mostly driven more by vegetation, shading, and building configuration. And microclimate is the interaction of material, spatial factors, not material alone. And then the implication, theoretically, albedo dominant for surface temperature and indirect for air temperature. And for practice, thermal comfort needs material and vegetation and spatial design combination. And for the limitation, no direct albedo measurement. And then for the future work, material measurement and simulation-based approach, especially for albedo, urban geometry, vegetation variation to evaluate design strategies. That's all my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Anissa. So it's time for a Q&A session. Oh, should see, yeah. You may stay in your position for a while, yeah? Okay. So is there any question from the audience? Audience who want to give some question may raise your hand. I think it's okay, yeah. This session would not be thesis defense session, yeah. It could be just discussion. Is there anyone? Okay, thank you. Could you introduce yourself, Julia?
All right. Okay. Hello, Manisa. Okay, this is a bit awkward because we actually work together. But anyways, my name is Audrey, and I'm also from ITS. So, Anissa, so after all of this research, this could be the initial step, right? So what's gonna be the next step? Are you gonna, for example, simulate this using like other kind of software, or are you gonna broaden the what do you call it, the location objects or the measurement points, or is there anything else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Miss Audrey. Well, you may answer the question.
Okay, thank you for the questions. The main goal of this research is because this research is about outdoor thermal comfort. So the main goal is mitigation strategies of urban heat island. And for the reach to the main goal, we need to do like simulation steps for experimental several strategies to choose what kind of best strategies that can be implemented to this context, because this Jalan Tunjungan is a heritage area. When we talk about heritage area, it has something to do with the heritage constraints or conservation regulation. And for the strategy, we cannot do massive intervention because of the limitation. So the next strategy is maybe do a simulation to find or identify what kind of strategy.
Okay, thank you for your answer, Miss Anissa. Is there any duration left? Hello, Miss Timekeeper. Okay then. Miss Timekeeper, is there time left for Q&A session for first presenter? Okay, so there are the second question. Okay. The question, okay, actually it's quite interesting enough, Miss Anissa, yeah, because I know that. So you did this research all by field measurement. Is there any software did you use for this research?
Yes, but for the next step,
No,
using software.
just
yeah.
in this all
Field
field measurement. Okay,
Yeah, field measurement.
that's quite effort actually, and you did this while sunny day. Well, okay, and I know how Surabaya can be. Yeah? Okay, but it's quite interesting actually. Well, maybe my question is, Jalan Tunjungan used to be historic area, yeah, historical area, kan?
Yeah.
So, are you have some recommendation, like maybe design strategies to improve this overall thermal condition, but without losing its historical aspect, like without altering the design? You know, you need to keep the style, you need to keep the historical aspect, but how do you can improve the thermal? Would you give some recommendation?
Okay, thank you for the questions. That's why I choose albedo facade and pavement, because it's a minimum intervention or minimum invasive to treat the corridor of a heritage area. And maybe for the mitigation strategies, it's not only using albedo, because albedo is not work alone. So we need to combine each other, because its strategy has its strengths and weakness. So we have to combine each other. And based on the previous research, the best strategy is combined with vegetation or natural based element.
So it can be a safe strategy, yeah,
safe strategy.
to not intervention the
Heritage.
historical aspect. Yeah, the heritage aspect. Okay, thank you for Miss Anissa. Audience may give applause to Miss Anissa. Okay, next to moving to our second presenter, we welcome. Oh, Miss Audrey also from ITS Surabaya. So you're a friend actually, yeah. The presentation is titled Field Measurement of Outdoor Thermal Conditions in the Educational Zone of ITS University. Okay, Miss,
Okay.
the floor
Alright.
is yours.
Thank you, moderator. I think I'll just wait until okay, it's ready. Okay, time starts now. Okay. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Audrey. I am a lecturer from the architecture department in ITS Surabaya. So I'm here to represent our research team, and we're going to talk about the field measurement of outdoor thermal conditions in the educational zone of ITS University campus. Wait a second, where's the pointer? Okay, sorry. And here, where's the laser? Sorry. Laser. Okay. All right. All good. Okay, so I just want to talk about the background of this research. We all know that the urban heat island is a problem in major cities such as Jakarta and Surabaya, as there are a lot of needs for us to expand our buildings because there are like rising population of the people. And right now, our lands are mostly covered by buildings and pavements and hard surfaces. And this problem also occurs in educational buildings. Right. In smaller campuses, the small plot of land is again covered by buildings. But then it also happens on larger universities, including our campus in Surabaya. Because in the last 10 years, there are a lot of extension to our university. We add more buildings, we add more parking areas, etc. And this drives this research question. So how are the outdoor thermal conditions after all of these changes in the last 10 years? And most importantly, how does the different landscapes and building configurations, the difference in the ratio, affect the thermal conditions? Right, next. Okay, so just a bit on to the theoretical framework, I just want to talk about how other research has studied about the microclimate of university campus in tropical regions. But then our research focused more than just that. So we want to see how the ratio between natural features according to man-made features affect the formal configurations and how it impact the air temperature, relative humidity, solar radiation, and also lastly, wind speed. And then, okay, next. All right, so this is the most important part of our research because we're gonna rely on this data a lot later on. So our research is again a field measurement, and we try to categorize our campus into these 4 big categories. Okay, so the first one here, we have the close grid cluster. So pretty much when the buildings are configured into like a closed square, we call that the closed grid. Right. And then when there is open grid cluster, it means that they're aligned into a grid, but then there are some empty spaces around it, like here, and then there are empty spots there. So next, we also have the main spine or corridor. So most likely this is the main road of ITS. So they're not enclosed by just buildings. They are covered with dense trees and vegetation. And lastly, we also have the open green space where there are just vegetations around. Okay, next. Okay, so interestingly, after using the sky pictures on top, and then we identify the ratio between the man-made features and the natural features, interestingly though, they appear to be equal. So it's 50 by 50, most of them. But the question is, between all of these 4 categories that I mentioned before, do they perform the same? You know, because they have the same ratio. And I will talk about that more after this. Right, so here are our results and discussion. As mentioned before, we have 4 different metrics, so I'll try to dissect into them one by one. The first one, we have air temperature. Okay, I've tried to highlight some important features here. It could be seen that, it's okay, I think that was static, but it's okay. So in the open grid cluster and also in the open green space, they tend to have lower air temperature. This is probably because our hypothesis is that because they have better ventilation compared to the rest, right? Compared to the closed grid cluster. So of course they have lower temperature. And then when we take a look at some higher points, for example, like the O3, I1, and also P3, they have more dense buildings or like obstructions, right? So the air ventilation got blocked. So when there's high sun radiation, the heat got trapped into the building configuration. So that's the important intake from this metric. I'll move on. And we have RH, relative humidity. Okay, so in a glance, we could tell that actually they have similar range. So it's between 50 until 60 in the morning until noon, and then in the afternoon, it reaches up to 70%. But interestingly though, there's this really high outlier. So in G3, it's an open green space. And our study conducted that it's actually because of evapotranspiration. Okay, so this is because of the vegetation. They produce a lot of moisture, but then the surrounding areas will actually limit how it dissipates. So it kind of makes sense why more vegetation means more moisture. Okay, next, we also have solar radiation. Okay, so generally in the closed grid cluster, such as O1 and O2, they have really low solar radiation. So it's about less than 400 solar radiation, watt per meter square. Right. And also, in I3 and PI, which they share the same characteristics with the closed grid cluster because they're surrounded by buildings and also other hard surfaces. But then in the open area though, of course, because they don't have any obstructions or like shadings, they tend to have really high solar radiation. They reach like 800 watt per square meter. Next, this is where it gets really interesting. If previously the results are about the same, now because of the wind here, we can tell the difference really clearly. So in the open grid cluster, the wind speed reaches 1.5 until 2.5 or like 3-ish, right? But then in the closed grid, it's really low. It's just like 0.5 to 1 meter square. So it means that, of course, because open grid has more, more openness, more porosity, wind can actually penetrate into the surrounding outdoor areas better compared to the closed grid. The open grid space is performing much better than the closed grid configurations. But then because the open grid space is also surrounded by trees, it kind of blocked the wind as well. Okay, so it doesn't perform as well as the open grid cluster where it's more open. Right, okay, so now it comes to the last few slides that I have. So in general, you can tell that the main spy, which was the main street, they tend to have the highest air temperature and also highest solar radiation. Okay, this is because of less wind penetration and high solar exposure. And then when it comes to average relative humidity, okay, thank you for the reminder. It comes to this closed grid cluster. Again, because they are trapped, the buildings are surrounded into like a tight square. The heat trapped into the building cannot dissipate, cannot go through the buildings because they're, again, really tight. And then for the average solar radiation, the main spine and open green space also have the highest points. And interestingly, for the open grid cluster, we have the best wind speed performance. And this is really intuitive, I guess, because they're open, more wind, etc. So it's easy. Next. Okay, so this is the last part of our result. So we also try to assess the UTCI, which we try to simplify it a little bit by using just air temperature based on our literature here by Zaire et al. So overall, in ITS University, it's under the high, strong, or like bad heat stress. Okay, so in general, it's above 23 and it reaches about 28-ish. Okay, but then exceptional cases are on O3, and then we also have I1, and then I2 and P3, where it reaches really high temperature. Okay, and this is because building obstructions lower heat dissipation by lower ventilation. Okay, all right. So here comes the conclusion. Okay, so other thermal conditions in ITS tell us something. Okay, we cannot just rely on this phenomenon where designers only want to add more shades or more vegetations into our building, because it doesn't always mean the best. We also need to think about how the design actually allows wind penetration and also porosity into the building. Okay, time's up. I guess that was it from us. Here are some recommendations and further research that we can read as well. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Miss Audrey. Next to the Q&A session. From the audience, you may raise your hand if you have a question to the presenter. Okay, thank
Oh,
you.
sure. Should we get the mic?
Thank you. My name is Muhammad Lasul Amal. I would like to ask you, Mr. Andre. We're talking about thermal discomfort. This means to the activity around the ITS or Institut Bagus Nurul. How does it affect between morning, afternoon, and evening? That's all I want to ask about.
Okay. Can I just answer, moderator? Okay, thank you, because you don't have the mic. You don't have the mic. Okay. So, thank you, Pak Akmal, for the question. Yeah, I actually missed that point earlier, but like you could see from the graph, we did 3 times measurement. So in the morning, at 1 p.m., and also at 5 p.m. in the afternoon. So the difference, maybe I'll just take a look at this graph right here. This is a perfect example. You could tell that the solid black one is the morning one, morning results, and then the dotted white is the 1 p.m. and then the gray one is 5 p.m. You could tell that in 5 p.m., of course, the UTSI or the thermal comfort is actually doing pretty great. It's not that high, right? And then during afternoon and during morning, of course, it gets really, discomfort. It gets really unsettling as well because it's too hot and you know how bad Surabaya weather can be, right? And sorry, what was your question again? I kind of rambled and forgot. Okay. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, for the students' activity and also the academician, maybe, yeah, we mostly don't walk around in the, at 1 p.m. ish. We don't want to, like, for example, if we go to the central canteen, some people, they prefer to use their cars. That's how bad it is when it's really close actually to our department. And in the afternoon, that's when people actually start doing their activities. Students, they sometimes gather around the parks. They just do study groups, etc. In the morning, yeah, most people, they do classes, right? Except for right now because it's holiday, so it's pretty much empty. So yeah, I guess that's how the thermal comfort affects our activities. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amal. Mr. Amal, ya? Yeah, Mr. Amal, for your question, and also Miss Audrey for your presentation. Well, actually, Surabaya, yeah, it's not only the weather, yeah, but I also like the food. Actually, I miss the taste of the red one fried rice.
Oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah, I really like Surabayan food. Actually, yeah. Well, is there any question or is there any time left? Okay, give applause to Miss Audrey. Thank you for your excellent presentation and also your contribution to this event. Okay, moving to our third presenter, there will be Miss Endrawati Fatima from Universitas Trisakti Jakarta. Okay, she will present her research on the spatial relationship between building density and urban heat island intensity in Cilegon City. Well, the floor is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Anita Ramadhani. I'm sorry, I am the presenter, not Andrawati Fatima. And I'm from Department of Urban and Regional Planning in Universitas Trisakti. We are talking about urban heat island again, but we going a little to west, yeah. To smaller city, it's about medium size, which is Cilegon City. So our paper is about special relationship between building density and urban heat island intensity in Cilegon City. As we know all, urban heat island or UHI refer to elevated air temperature in urban area compared to their surrounding. And there are so many factors that trigger the formation of UHI, such as concrete and asphalt, and then lack of green space, vehicle industry, and then building density and other human activity. And Cilegon City, especially, is located in Banten and developing into the largest steel and petrochemical industrial center in Indonesia. There is Krakatau Steel here. And the industrial is covering nearly 30% of its total land area. But there are some places that still in land largely covered by the protected forest area. So there are so many density there. There's some variation about building density in this city. Therefore, the critical gap remain in understanding how built environment characteristic, particularly in building density, interact with land cover dynamic to shape the spatial distribution of LST, land surface temperature, in rapidly urbanizing cities. So the method that we use is correlation analysis by ordinary least square (LS) and Moran-Swans to land surface temperature and UHI. So the land surface temperature will be categorized into UHI area and non-UHI area, and percentage of building density. Both will be compared in hexagonal cell by 50 hectares. And the data is from 20 and 10 and 20 and 20. 2010 and 2020. Okay, the result, I will divide it in 5 parts. First, we will see some of the land use land cover in 2010 and 2020 in Cilegon City. So as we can see, there are increasing industrial area, the red one, and also the residential area. And then spatial distribution of LST and UHI. So to differentiate USI from non-USI, we use the equation. So from the land surface temperature there, and then UHI there, we can see kind of similar pattern, yeah. The red one is UHI and the yellow one is non-UHI. And then for building density, we can see from 2010 to 2020, there are increasing of building density. And we can see that the increase is along the main road. So there are some facility to facilitate connectivity between Java and Sumatra via Merak and Bakahuni Port. So we can see the increasing building density along the road. After that, we do the correlation analysis between building density and UHI. From the OLS result, we can see that the result indicate the relationship between building density and UHI strengthen over time with the explanatory power of the R square increasing from 2010 to 2020. We can see for R square it increasing from 0.16 yeah, to 0.124. So we can see the increasing, but it's still low, yeah, it's still low. For Moran-Swans result, we can see that Moran-Swans analysis indicate a significant positive spatial autocorrelation in 2010 and 2020, confirming that urban heat patterns are clustered rather than randomly distributed. But we can see too that in 2020 there are weaker clustering because the urban expansion is dispersed. So for the discussion, from the OLS and Morans 1, it confirmed that a significant positive relationship between building density and LST, but UH high cannot be explained by building density alone. From the R square, we can see that the number is still low. That means there are some factors that can contribute to the UHI. In Cilegon, we can see that there are places that exhibit high LSD despite relatively low building density due to industrial waste heat, carbon dioxide emission from industrial. And then what we can do as a planner, what the mitigation? Yeah, first we can do the increasing non-built land. And then strengthen the green space provision or coefficient dasar hijau KDH to be stricter in the industrial area. And then this one is interesting to creating connected green corridor rather than insulated green spaces. So we made a corridor, it give more cooling. And then integrate UHI mitigation into the RTRW, it's spatial planning. Through green infrastructure, high albedo and permeable material, waste heat management, emission control, industrial buffer zone. So the conclusion, this study demonstrates that there is a significant positive relationship between building density and LST in Cilegon City. And there is a strengthening of this relationship from 2010 to 2020 that indicate the urban densification increasingly contribute to the UHI effect. But however, the Morans 1 analysis confirmed that this relationship is not spatially uniform. So it's not so clustered that UHI pattern exhibit significant clustering influenced by local condition. In particular, industrial land use play a critical role where high surface temperature occur even in areas with low population, low building density. So it's highlight that so many factors that contribute to UHI in Kota Cilegon. Overall, UHI formation in Cilegon is indicated by the drive. Okay, so we have to do some. Okay, it's indicated by the drive by a combination of urban density, industrial activity, land use pattern, environmental factor. Therefore, to do mitigation, it requires a special integrated planning approach, including controlling urban density, enforcing minimum green space provision, increasing vegetation cover, and managing industrial heat emission with the framework of special planning policies such as RTRW or maybe even ADTR. Okay, that's all. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Endrawati, for your presentation. Now moving to Q&A session. May all audience who would like to give a question may raise your hand. Suddenly becomes quiet when there's photographer here. Okay, we're still around heat stress city. Yeah, it's not just you and Surabaya. Here, Jogja also. You don't want to go in Malioboro well like this afternoon. No, unless you bring ice cream from Tempo. Actually, yeah, you may visit Tempo, but oh no, we don't get sponsor from Tempo. Actually, I can't mention Tempo. Yeah, actually, yeah. Okay. Is there any question from the audience?
Actually, our our research is very aligned with the first research.
Yeah.
We can use it for one book
Yeah.
because there are so many factors together.
Yeah, like different city, yeah, but you can make some regulation actually, and it's quite another sample from the presenter one. Okay, maybe I would like to give a question, maybe hopefully can be followed by the audience from my question. Okay, my question will be, since you recommended regulating the building coverage ratio, yeah, for future special plans, but is there any immediate mitigation that can be applied to the existing industrial, which is, it's already dense actually? Is there any immediate mitigation, or maybe there is a sample that already exists in this world
Okay.
who can, yeah, reduce the thermal heat?
Actually, for industrial area, it's pretty low density, but it has so many emission. Yeah, so it makes the high USI too. But for the dense area, what we can do is increase the corridor of green infrastructure, and um, it's still in the theory, but some of the reason why dense area makes so many UHI is from lack of ventilation and the same surface level. Now you can use the different material for making it not the same. So you can what you can say, pantulan.
Yeah,
The reflection it's will be different in different area, and it will make lesser UHI.
Yeah, that's what you said, that your paper is really can be integrated with presenter one. Yeah, the first presenter actually. Yeah, me too. I do agree. Or maybe there are followed question by the audience. Or maybe from the first presenter, you agree to make some book with. Oh no, am I allowed to do this? Oh yeah, cannot, yeah, because Ichiap already have a book. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for. Oh, is there any question? I want to make sure. Okay, then maybe that's enough. Okay, thank you for your presentation. Actually, Miss Endrawati, may give applause to Miss Endrawati.
Thank you.
Okay, moving to our last presenter. Well, actually, this finally we can get colder city actually, because Mr. Amal is coming from Institut Teknologi Bandung from ITB. Well, actually, I miss the breeze of Bandung. Actually, I want to go there. Give me holiday. Okay, Mr. Amal paper is titled Exploring the Tectonic Traits of Traditional South Kalimantan Houses for Wetland Resilient Buildings. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Ilyas Sulamal, and I am from ITB, but I'm come from my home is from Kalimantan, South Kalimantan. And for this time, I'm is presenting my research and my thesis from ITB. It's called Exploring the Tectonic Traits of Traditional Kalimantan House for Wetland Resilient Building. Okay, next let's go. From the introduction, it's called South Kalimantan itself has roughly 30% of wetland, and it's just from 1.119 million hectares. This wetland, and this wetland can crucial benefits to especially flood mitigation, automation, and etc. Okay, next. However, driven by growth of real estate, building, house, and etc., from actually about 54%, and just so bigger and getting bigger, and this could cause a build what is it called coverage wetland, and in this could getting bigger and bigger from each year, and technically increase also flooding and impact building damage in South Kalimantan. Next. And from my previous studies, from my also lecturer Muhammad and Zairen as well from highlight the construction of traditional house and identifying the conceptual of what's it called suku Banjar community. And the previous studies also only hide only one object, and this. There are no building criteria, and this research identification and correlation between resilience and building community. Next. So the output and the goal of this research is knowing or observing about tectonic characteristic and capability of wooden construction and recommendation of building vernacular. Next. So the conceptual research framework for my research is the output offline of this research is building a knowledge in building vernacular construction for the resilience of building wetland resilient and flood mitigation building in House Kalimantan Selatan. Okay, next. So the variable of this research is from previous studies. This research looking from the variable of tectonic, and there are joint details, tectonic, economic materials, anatomy, space, ornamentation, and spatial anatomy. Next. Okay, next. And from the object the object we use from this 12 there are actually 12 typology, and we use only 2, which is Bubuan Tinggi and Gajah Baliku. Next. The methodological, there are 3 steps that I've been conducted. From goal 1 using qualitative, and goal 2 using quantitative, and goal 3 from mixed use synthesis space. Next. The methodology, this research using from the first step using qualitative method using what's it called? There are actually there are tools with called Leica Leader, which is all using 3D object. That are using this object. I'm using this object tools and look out from the 4 object. Okay, next. And these objects using after using Leica, I'm using from the 3D tool software, and from this from software, we look out from the previous synthesis variable, synthesis tectonic variables. Okay, next. And so for the research findings, and this is the button. Next. Okay, so why South Kalimantan traditional house can withstand from wetland resilient and flood mitigation? But first from all, we should just cite which is the site the orientation is towards the river, and the build up, or we can call it KDB. It's under 30% below. Okay, next. As for the building mass, it tends to be slender and symmetrical, and for the characteristic tends to be much more hierarchy. Next. And for the building space matters, it tends to be symmetrical also and ample circulation. And for the internal space, it tends to be quite interconnected. So this connected can help address challenge from humidity, thermal comfort, and improves disaster evacuations. Next. As for the characteristic window materials, it tends to be much higher, which is with about 45 and 40%. It tends to mitigate thermal comfort, this just called humidity, and also disaster evacuations. Next. as for the facade, we can see from this roof which has about 40 angles and tends to be mitigate from a high rain frequency. Next, okay. This also the same object. Next object again. Okay. Now from this building classification, we can see that there which high what's it called stilt building, and the roof itself is at 40 degree. Okay, next. And from the architectural plan is also the same, which just has the building. It just need to be 40 angles. Okay, next. Okay. And this what's called the uniqueness of South Kalimantan traditional houses. It has what is called Kachapuri foundation, and this can withstand from about 100 years from wetland and flood mitigation. Next. And from this column, which is as pasak, automotive stand joint, and lap joint, and takik joint. And next. From the after the using from takik, the joint, and mortise stand joint, and this could just called from this simulation using etaps, it can increase the effectiveness from framing. Next. And this is using is simulated between using SNE wet condition and dry condition. Next. And from the support also increase decreased by using rotation joint has actually increased the load distribution, and etc. can increase the certain point and low load at the others. Next. Okay. And from the support building reaction using construction materials and STM, using that the building itself has fulfilled their performance requirement from the standard national Indonesian and American standard building for wood construction. Next. And this is for hydrodynamic because we intend to withstand with disaster flood mitigation, and using simulation that the building itself has withstand the hydrodynamic pressure, and it is actually safe, but also almost not actually destructive. Okay, next. And from the why the building can withstand the flood mitigation, use that the building itself using woolen what's called ironwood construction. Next. And this is the conclusion that the what's it called building itself can using much more stronger that we can learn from the locally technologies that the local or the past technologies can we can learn from them that the building itself can withstand the disaster building. Next. And this is the main conclusion. The problem building house and wetlands containers such as unstable condition can be solved through technological application, and the key findings, technological aspect traditional to contribute their durability and sustainability. And the application technological basic can be used as consideration in construction building, and this research into tectonic can be one way to develop building methods on wetland to maintain the sustainability of the environment and the building. Okay. Okay, thank you for your attention. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Amal, for your presentation. Well, moving on to Q&A session from the audience. You may raise your hand if there are any question to the presenter. Okay, thank you, Miss Audrey.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Pak Amal, for the presentation. It was really great. So, if I saw it right, so you used some sort of like a software, like a simulation tool, right? I just want to ask about the simulation model. So, how accurate is, like, for example, the building materials, etc., to the real conditions of the houses? Because again, we all know that when it comes to thermal comfort, building surfaces and building envelope matters, especially when it comes to the materials. So yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I'll give the mic back. Okay.
Thank you, Miss Audrey. You may answer her question.
Okay, just for the input of for your softwares, I'm just using the software for what's it called, structure simulations. As for the such as thermal discomfort and comfort, humidity, and etc. I'm asking for the the occupants. The occupants of the occupants of the houses. That's all. But as for the what's it called, the integrity of the variables of what's it called, thermal discomfort, and how they feel about it, they just feel this is already good, and because of what's it called, woolen wood or iron wood, we know it that the materials is from this wood, and it can this what's it called, make the air in the house feels much more comfort. And also because of the building itself using steel house, the air under the building, it can make the air and the humidity in the building can make it more comfort. That's all. That's, I think, we from the literature and from the question from the occupant of the houses. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Amal, for your answer. Well, actually, it's really interesting paper you has just delivered, but unfortunately, our time is almost over here. Thank you for Mr. Amal, and I also want to thank you for all the audience here. Actually, it's really interesting discussion that we got, but as I recall, our time is it's already over here. Yeah, okay. So please give a round of applause for all of us today. And have a great afternoon. Actually, you can enjoy the rest of our event and also enjoy Jogja. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So we will be having directly our the next session. We will have, I think, 4 presenters. I'm just wondering whether all of you are already here. So for the first one will be from Malayla, yeah. And then the second one, Nala Hutasoy. Or is he or she will be online? Nala Hutasoid, and then Julius Antokida? No? The paper is about microspatial mobility adaptation to climate-induced coastal inundations. Or is it here, or they're gonna be joining online, or? No, not yet. So they're not yet here. And then after that, wait. And then we will have Felicita. Okay, you're already there. And then the last one, we will have Adinda Tanjung. Okay, so, all right. So, yes, approximately we will have 3 presentation because only 3 that are present right now, but perhaps we will have the complete 4 later on. So, the rules, I think it's the same as the previous session. So each of you will be given like 10 minutes to present. And then, what do you prefer? Do you prefer to have like Q&A session afterwards? Or do you want to like all of you present and then Q&A at the end? After all the presentations. Okay. So I think everyone will be agreed. So we will have all the 3 presentations, and then afterwards, then we will have questions. Yeah. Oh no. Oh, one by one. Okay. Okay. So then, yes. Okay, then we will have like one by one. So first presenters will present and then proceed by Q&A and so on. Okay, so Mbak Laila, please.
Oke, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, researcher and participant. My name is Laila Fatimah Ramindinda from the Gadjah Mada University, and today I would like to present my research. The entitled is Connecting the City Public Transport Routes as the Backbone of Urban Mobility in Madiun. Okay, first of all, I will tell you about the background of this study. According to the United Nations, by the year 2050, the most of the world population will live in the urban areas. The transportation problems such as the traffic congestion and then pollution and then wasted travel time and inefficiency in land use, such as the Madiun is the one of the important public transport in East Java. There is a transportation sector is increased significantly, and then beside that, the number of the private vehicle is also increased. This situation puts more pressure, such as the Madiun city, to improve the public transportation. So this study have 3 research objectives. 1, to evaluate the existing public transport. 2, to identify optimal location. And then 3, the develop of integrated public transport network to supporting sustainable urban mobility. Next. Okay, this paper use quantitative research with the descriptive and spatial analysis with QGIS. These are the indicator for the transportation route and the route plan. These are their criteria with the pedestrian access radius, and then the availability of existing, and then route classification, and the importance of activities. And the indicator of the route plan is the movement demand analysis, and then the analysis of existing and serve coverage. And finally, I identify with the transportation demand and fleet recruitment. Next. And this is a research framework that contains the input, process, and then output. This first step, I identify with the existing transport, and then the output is gap identification. After that, the second step, I identify with the point of interest, and then the output is the planned bus stop location. And then the third step, I identify with the land use pattern, and the output is the plan for circular. And finally, I identify with the population projection, and the output is the requirement of new buses 20 and 45. And this is a result for the existing condition of map of the Madiun city. this public transport in Madiun City is not limited. There are has only the use of school buses, and then after that the transportation in Madiun just only the concentrate in the major route or main route, and then the connectivity with the maybe a terminal and the railway station uncovered. And then this is a result for spatial analysis. On the screen, there are map plan bus stop and then plan spatial pattern. And this result, there are proposed 12 new buses, and then there are surface coverage on maybe along the 500 meters, which means that the people can reach along 5 until 10 minutes of walking. Next. This is a result for comparison of effectiveness the existing and the proposed network. There are more connected because first it serve built up area and residential area, and second it serve point of interest like in the commercial area, lalu education and the office. And its strategic location aligned from the Madiun spatial plan to 20 and 45. Next. And this is a result for transportation routes, the existing and transportation route. There are this result. There are four new the transportation route, the connected like the railway station, and then the commercial area, and then the education and the others. This result can transportation demand projection. There are finally in 20 and 45 there are new buses maybe along the 92 buses. This is a discussion from this paper. There are integrated the land use and the POI to improve the public transport, and then the proposed network is aligned with the Madiun spatial plan to 20 and 45, and then the proposed network can better connectivity like the resident area and then commercial, education and others, and then the projection demand maybe 19.2 to buses in 20 and 45, the need of flat expansion. And this is conclusion. The finding indicate that the integrated land use, point of interest, and then the public transport provide the comprehensive approach to develop urban mobility in Madiun City. And that's it, my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, so yes, thank you, Mbak Laila, for your wonderful presentation. So I will now invite all the participants here to, if you have any questions, so please.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for the information and research about Madiun, but in Madiun, I want to know, will this research provide several new routes? Yes.
Yes.
Is the old route still you use again or no? And then how effective the new route coverage against the old route?
Okay. Okay.
Yes, you can just, I think, the question is also a bit straightforward, so you can just.
Okay. Thank you for this attention. Thank you for this question. This paper, I use the existing transportation route in Madiun, and then the purpose of the transport Madiun, it's cover maybe in the buffer coverage maybe along the 500 meters to the coverage like the importance area such as the education, and then such as the commercial and the office. That's it.
Yes, okay, I think that's also quite clear. So then the next questions.
Okay, thank you for the interesting present. I'm Felicita from Gadjah Mada University. You said that you propose the transport network based on the project demand and spatial analysis. And how do you plan to ensure that is proposed to adaptable to the future change, such as change in behavior travel or remote working or change land use or etc. And then might affect the effectiveness of your proposed route transport network. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. The proposed network is intended of the flexibility route. There are not the fixed of route. So why the not fixed of route? Because the maybe in the period time we know that the people can have the change of behavior mobility, so we can maybe in the period time we can change over the public transportation loop, such as the maybe commercial area, and then the maybe public mobility behavior, and then the land use or the on the and each other. So if you ask me for the maybe the effect of effectiveness, and I think it effectiveness maybe year by year, because the currently in this paper is currently project, and this paper in existing condition, that what mean that the in this paper I just analyze with the maybe in population projection in 20 and 45, but it not the maybe another time maybe people can change the mobility behavior, like the mobility behavior and then land use pattern and others. Maybe that's it.
Okay, so perhaps any other questions? One last questions, perhaps, from the audience? No? Okay, if there is no question, well, I do have like one question, like a short one. What do you think will be better? Shall we plan the route first and then let the point of interest comes along later on? Or shall we just look at what we have right now, like the current point of interest, where they are located, and then we plan the routes later?
Okay, I think it's important to point of interest, because we know that the people can reach activity to a place to another place with the urgent activity, like the commercial area, maybe education and office in others. So I think if we want to, or we can to propose the new routes, we not only just know that what we can make sure what people serve, but we know that spatial planning like the important activities.
Okay, so yes, if there is no other question, then thank you, Mbak Laila, and yeah, good luck with your future research. And then yes, perhaps applause for Mbak Laila. Okay, then I don't think we have the second presenter, or is he or she already here? Nala Hutaso, Julius Antokida, Irene Sondang, Fitri Nitya, and Ega Wahyudi. No? Nobody? And also not on the online. Okay. Then we will move on to our third presenter. Now gonna be second. Mbak Felicita, please.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunities. I am Felicita from Gajah Mada University. I will present our paper that prepared with me and Prof. Bambang Hariwibisono. And it is discussed about mobility and quality of life in Jabodetabek. We start from the global context. Indonesia has the 4 most populated population in this world after India, China, and United States, and it makes the pressure absolutely in housing, infrastructure, and also in mobility. And we move to the national context. Why Jakarta? Jakarta selected because of the province, the highest population in the city in Indonesia, and also still function the capital city and also metropolitan core area in Jabodetabek. And then there are economic attractiveness in Jakarta, and the impact is the increase of land price. So the population living outside Jakarta will conducted main activities in Jakarta. There is increasing the number of commuters in Jabodetabek under Presidential Regulation number 60 and 2020. And then what the condition of the commuters in Jakarta? Jakarta has the rank 24 most congested city in the world, and then the average travel time is more than 60 minutes. The most smooth is motorcycle and commuter lines, and then the average travel distance is around 20 to 30 kilometers, and for some commuters it has 3 hours for the travel time. And then why this study so important? There are 5 reasons. The first is many problems in Jakarta, in Jabodetabek, many problems such as problems in population density, and then travel stress and air pollution. So the commuting is one of the daily routine activities that can affect the health. So it's important to measure the quality of life that can analyze the condition, impact, and support the solution from the best of the data. And then there are research gap. Mostly the quality of life study is measured by subjective or perception. There are limited study in Indonesia, especially in Jabodetabek, that between commuting and quality of life, and then data source is still mostly based on direct survey, not only by time series data, and the existing studies has not been integrated with the spatial policies. So the goal is to measure the quality of life by the objective data, identification the indicator that significantly affect the quality of life, and get the policy targeted from the data and improvement the quality of life. So we propose this title, The Mobility Trap, How Daily Commuting Activities Can Enhance the Quality of Life of Urban Residents in Jabodetabek. There are 2 research questions to get the 2 objectives. The first is to develop quality of life measurement for commuters in Jabodetabek based on the objective indicators, and the second is to identify commuting related factor that influence the quality of life, especially in health domain. And then there are several concepts that we use in the study, from the commuting until the variable selection for the model. The method we use 2023 Jabodetabek Commuter Survey conducted by BPS Statistik Indonesia, and the study area is in Jabodetabek Metropolitan Region, selected. Okay, and then there are the sampling unit, and then this is the analytical framework and methods. There are three groups that relationship among the variable. The first is commuting activities. It can be directly get in from the commuter survey. And then the second is commuter travel experience. And then the third is quality of life. The assumption is the commuting activities influence the commuter travel experience and then influence the quality of life. Before we move to the model of the data, we show that the commuter profile data in Jabodetabek, there are 14.9 commuters in Jabodetabek and mostly male in productive age and activity is work. There are finding the model is good. Goodness of it is gets goodness of it, and then the result is there is significant factor from the mobility characteristics such as travel time, number of transport mode, time travel outside the residence, travel distance, and transportation costs. And there is a factor in quality of life in travel experience and quality of life in health domain. And the contribution of the study is three contributions. The first is academic, to develop an objective and data-driven approach, and the methodological is combine correlation and many other statistical analysis. And then the policy is provide evidence for spatial targeted transport and urban policy. And the recommendation is improve model integration and reliability, and then reduce travel time and also commuting costs. And then the last one is use quality of life based spatial policies. Okay, to conclude this study, the mobility not only just transportation issue but also health issue and then quality of life of urban area. Thank you. That's all about our presentation. I give to the Bu Isti.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Felicia, for your wonderful presentation. So please applause for Mbak Felicia. Okay, so now to the audience, if there's any questions, please raise your hand. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Felicitas. I want to ask you, most of previous studies measure quality of life using subjective perception, whereas your study use objective indicator derived from the BPS commuter survey. How do you ensure that this objective indicator accurate represent commuter quality of life, particular in health domain, and what is the main advantage of this approach compared to subjective measurement?
Okay, thank you, Laila, for the questions. Can I give the answer now?
Yes.
Okay. From the slide, we know that the quality of life is multidimensional indicator that we can get the indicator by randomly or by intuition. So we use the WHO quality of life framework to ensure about the theoretical validation to ensure the okay, this is the indicator that measure the quality of life. So we use the quality of life from the WHO framework, and then there are many domains, 6 domains to get measure the quality of life. There is a theoretical validation to ensure that is accurate data indicator to measure the quality of life. And then beside of the theoretical validation, we also use the statistical validation. We know that this study used from the 2023 Jabodetabek Commuter Survey conducted by BPS. BPS used the sampling unit. There are numbers of blocks and many steps to use the collection and then to pre-processing, processing data until data published. So there is encouraged about that is data is accurate from the processing data, and then after data published, there are many steps in analytical methods that we use in this study, from the data pre-processing, data normalization, reverse coding, and then the variable selection. There are threshold statistic criteria that can we approve what is the indicator that can significantly influence the quality of life. And then there are some model, and the next slide, the model is criteria is goodness of fit. It is ensure about the statistical validation, and then before we discuss from the theoretical validation. So that is the validation to measure the quality of life. And then the second questions about the advantage. Okay, we use this objective data rather than the subjective data for the previously study, because of it reduced the personal respondent bias. We get the objective indicators to get some indicators to accurate data. So when we use the objective data, it can reduce the personal respondent bias, and then it can be calculated in time series, because of the data is from the official statistic in routine 2 years, and the survey can calculate by time series data. And then the third is this data, based on the data, can make the policies based on the data, evidence-based policies. That is advantage why we use the objective data rather than the subjective data. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so thank you. Okay, is there any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So interesting topic about your research. I want to know, can the quality of life measurement that you built can be adapted in another metropolitan, like maybe Bandar Lampung Metropolitan, maybe the beginning metropolitan, and what if yes, what indicator needs to be adapted for another metropolitan, maybe? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Adinda, for the questions. Yeah, this study will be directly in others metropolitan areas, such as metropolitan in Bandung, and then Denpasar, Sulawesi, and so on. From the factor indicator there is indicator from the commuter survey. The commuter survey conducted in 10 metropolitan area in Indonesia. So we can calculate or research in another metropolitan area in 10 metropolitan area in Indonesia. The data is conducted by BPS also, and the variable is also maybe same with these variables. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, is there any other questions from the audience? No? Okay, if there is no questions, I do have like some questions. Did you also include, like, for example, the different mode of transportation in this analysis?
Okay.
Yeah. or
Yeah.
not? I mean, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
It is all of modes of
Yeah.
transportation.
So then, what is the worst commuting mode that will affect the quality of life?
Okay. For now, I did not calculate
Okay.
the tabulation
Mhm.
of the percentage quality
okay.
of life by the modes.
Mhm.
It just model and significant factor that
I
significant
see.
influence the quality of
Okay.
life, especially in health domain.
Okay.
And the next we will
The stage. Will
next
be.
stage, yes.
Okay.
Next stage we will calculate
Mhm.
the cross tabulation
I see. Yep.
from any others variables such as modes and maybe area,
I see.
age,
Yes.
yes,
Okay.
and so on.
Yeah, because that
Thank
will
you.
be interesting, like to see what kind of transport mode or commuting mode that
Yeah.
will give like that influence perhaps for our quality of life.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you, Mbak Felicita, for your wonderful presentation. So again, applause for Mbak Felicita.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if this the one who's joined Aran is the no. Oh, that's yours. Okay, so I think then we proceed to the supposed to be the last presenter of this session. So Mbak Adinda Tanjung, yeah.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adinda Skartanjung. I am from Transport Doctoral Program from SAPPK ITB. In this opportunity, I will share my ongoing research, the topic about reframing sustainable transport at the neighborhood scale, a conceptual framework for global South urban context. But in this presentation, I will focus on the Indonesian urban context. This is the 5 part that I will say to you. And from the introduction, I start from a problem about aggregate city scale assessment can hide neighborhood and equity. I found 2 problems about aggregation, that city average smooth away variation between neighborhoods, but disaggregating data help reveal this spatial variation. And second, about construct, some barriers exist only at the neighborhood scale, like block sidewalks, object dependency, unlit routes or the street too dark in the night, and local access rules. And this cannot be captured if the indicator itself is absent. So this aggregation will fix the first problem, but reframing will fix the second problem. And there are several evidence from Indonesia and whether global South studies show neighborhood scale mobility gaps. It's about first last mile gap, travel cost burden, safety and comfort, and also about informal modes and local rules. This condition rarely appear as indicator variable in city scale sustainable transport indicator. And this research gap, I found several research gap. First, about city scale assessment measure system performance, not to identify who is disadvantaged, where and why there's happened disadvantage, and also equity is recognized but remains weakly translated into neighborhood scale diagnosis. And then data intensive framework developed but require adaptation to Indonesian urban context. So this study respond to that gap through equity responsive sustainability sustainable mobility. That in ARSM position the Kelurahan Indonesia as the diagnosis operational scale for Indonesia. So from aggregate performance and down to distributive neighborhood diagnosis, and then from the diagnosis to the differentiated policy response. So in this research, we will develop ERSM as a neighborhood scale framework to diagnose distributive mobility and equity and guide context-sensitive planning response. So in this research, we built the framework from the literature base, and also we look analysis to the Indonesian policy that relate to the ERSM framework. This is the method that I have used in this research. I do the systematic literature review from several clustering literature and to make the theoretical foundation of this research. And then I did thematic analysis to found and organize the substantial dimension, and in this research I found 7 dimension, and for the output is relational architecture. And then I also do national policy analysis. I have read 43 national mobility related documents against the 7 dimension to surface covers and distributive gap. And then about the measurement system that will follow is the next phase, because still in development. And then this is the ERSM framework from literature that I'm mapping and organize the substantial dimension from the literature. This is 7 dimension. The first distributive justice line in this framework is just a principle normative for this to read every dimension in this framework. The day 1 is accessibility to essential opportunities, is positioned as the neighborhood integrator. And then, however, access is not automatically equitable. So, day 1 is support the condition in day 1 is from day 2 affordability, economic burden, and then day 3 safety, security, and comfort, and then day 4 environmental sustainability, external burden, and then day 5 infrastructure and mobility service, and they seek land use transport integration is per structural enable. They work together to explain the structural condition behind the accessibility. And then finally, the day 7 about governance and policy responsiveness is the implementation foundation. This is where the responsive aspect become important. Diagnosis become equity responsive only when it can be translated into differentiated policy responses for a different neighborhood condition. And how to operate this framework? The way to implement this is by turning this 7 dimension into observable construct, and the measurement system still development. So I can show how the framework operational. Obviously, each dimension will be measured based on what actually exists or on the condition as perceived by a community. And a second result is about mapping national policy against the 7 dimension. I read about 43 national policy document, include Indonesian laws, government regulation, and ministerial regulation. The score that show in this presentation is measure normative instrumental density. I'm not measure the policy performance. So, in other words, it shows how strongly its ERSM dimension appears in policy text and instrument, not whether implementation has success in practice. So in this, so the key finding is that national policy support exists, but it's translated into neighborhood scale distributive diagnosis is still weak. This is the planning implication about from this research. That is, the diagnosis profile is read as a planning instrument. So its neighborhood typology maps to a differencing package of spatial intervention. For example, service deficit, economic barrier, spatial mismatch, and then compound disadvantage. And fills the missing scale in the planning hierarchy between city scale like RTRW or RDTR and leave neighborhood mobility. And this is my research contribution from conceptual and theoretical is integrated distributive justice, relational dimension logic Indonesia, kelurahan context into the diagnostic architecture. So the methodology and design operational pathway in development ongoing, and then for planning practice, diagnostic planning tool that translate mobility and equity into spatial intervention. There is several key finding. This translation gap is systemic, and then day 2 about affordability is structurally weak across the policy landscape, and ERSM reposition the neighborhood as the diagnostics operational scale integrating equity and sustainability. And this is my limitation is about okay, maybe that's all my presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mbak Adinda Tanjung. Okay, now I will open the Q&A session for the audience. So anyone who would like to raise a question, please? Yes.
Thank you, Miss Adinda, for the interesting presentation. I will ask about, since your framework is not been that is conceptual, has not been implemented in the real, and what do you think the biggest challenge to applying the real in the real neighborhood in Indonesia? Just thank you.
Okay, thank you. Maybe the challenging is to make create the observable construct from each dimension that can be measured in Indonesia, that maybe the data is not too complete in every urban and every city is not the same the data. Maybe my challenge is how I can make the measurement system can coverage all the all the city in Indonesia maybe. Yeah, I will find when I construct the measurement system. There's maybe some indicator that it's hard to in one city, one neighborhood to another neighborhood in different scale of the city, like metropolitan Jakarta, and I will do in Bandar Lampung, so it's different data. So I will make some scenario for another city maybe.
Okay, great. Is there any other questions from the audience? No? If not, I would like to pose like just a small questions like, why are you using distributive justice?
Because I want to see how the problem can how the condition in every neighborhood or every household, if they feel the same condition, and then why if one neighborhood and another neighborhood have a different access, maybe why. So if it's supposed to be every neighborhood have one has the same accessibility, is great accessibility is the outcome integrator, but why different, and then I use the distributive
Okay.
space.
Okay. Well, that's actually like a more philosophical questions. So I was not really expecting like a very direct answers. But anyway, thank you for that. So, and I think that's a good research to be like following up later on. So yes, thank you, Mbak
Thank you.
Dinda Tanjung.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so I don't think we have the only missing presenter. So no, there is yours is not here, right? Okay, so I think we can just close this session. Well, the bell also just rang. So yeah, as a moderator, I will say thank you for all of your attendance and also your participations. I hope this will give like insights, and enjoy Jogja, and perhaps see you in the next time. And I mean, we see each other on the closing ceremony. So yeah, have a nice day. Coffee break, I guess. Yes. So please enjoy the coffee break first.